It seems to me that about 30 some years ago, Foster Cline is the person who really brought attachment disorder into the awareness of therapists and parents. At that point in time, I think it's pretty safe to say that it was almost a completely psychosocial model and a psychosocial disorder. As neuroscience knowledge has exploded in the past 10 years, maybe even 5 years, certainly the entire attachment field has embraced that knowledge and used it to have even a broader understanding and maybe a more specific understanding of what was thought to be primarily a psychosocial problem. I think that people knew that trauma, and the early people talking about attachment disorder certainly explained and discussed trauma and the impact that it had on attachment disorder. But I think they guessed that there was some actual physiological involvement, but there wasn't enough research to lead us to that conclusion. And now that's pretty much where the field is in terms of being related very specifically to trauma and how trauma has impacted brain development and has impacted the psychosocial aspect of what was initially looked at. Well, I think the people that are making these criticisms are people who really aren't well informed, and they're using information and distorting information that some of which may have been relevant 30 years ago, 25 years ago. But even if we would say that, I would think that not a lot of harm has ever really been done during attachment therapy, even when the work was more intrusive and coercive. The current critics talk about the deaths that have occurred and the horrible, torturous activities that occurred, and I don't think any deaths have been documented to have happened in attachment therapy. And the claims of that intrusiveness are overplayed, and certainly they're, at this point in time, completely irrelevant. I would think many people have run away from those early days, and I don't see that I feel that's appropriate. I think it's more appropriate to say that this field has evolved like all fields, and I would think we would all feel very bad if we were doing today what we did even 10 years ago and 20 years ago. If you think of medical analogies, gallbladder surgery used to be completely invasive, and you'd be in the hospital for 2 weeks and you had this huge incision, and now it's typically an outpatient procedure. So I think the evolution of attachment therapy and the understanding of trauma and attachment has changed what practice has been and allows us to do more, probably with less, actually. The current critics are just out of touch and out of date and are talking about things that are old school. It's like describing the old-time westerns when bullets were removed with a knife and some whiskey, and that probably once was done and it probably worked then, but certainly it's not something to be critical of today.
The developmental trauma disorder is a new disorder, a diagnosis proposed by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and it is a diagnosis that seeks to capture the range of impact that we see with children that have had complex trauma in their lives. And so it focuses not just on the behavior of children, but looks at things like affect regulation, the way that children think in a distorted way, how their sense of self is damaged, how they can be dissociative, and how they can have really severe problems with attachment.
Why has this disorder been mistaken for other things over the years?
Well, as you see, the breadth of these problems overlap with a lot of different possible diagnoses. And so what's happened is children with attachment-related difficulties and trauma have tended to collect a range of diagnoses like attention deficit disorder, bipolar disorder, other disruptive behavior disorders. And the problem is that those disorders never capture the underlying problem, that they are simply behavioral. And so when children collect that list of diagnoses, the real problem is never addressed and therefore never solved.
If we don't treat reactive attachment disorder successfully, then we end up with children whose lives turn into a real mess. I know that's not a real important psychological term, but what we'll find is that they will develop criminal conduct. We can find that they'll develop major mental illnesses. They'll have difficulty raising their own children, difficulty sustaining employment because of the conflicts with authority, and the difficulty following directions. We will not have a pretty outcome if we're not able to address the issues that arise from reactive attachment disorder. Adults with attachment disorder as children will grow a personality disorder among other mental illnesses. So we'll see an antisocial personality disorder. It's prone to develop into a borderline personality disorder. On the mental health side, apart from personal functioning, we'll end up with kids that grow into very depressed, even suicidal adults, have debilitating anxieties, and even psychotic levels of mental illness. They'll end up with two different kinds of difficulties. One will be in their personality functioning, which we refer to as personality disorders. Typically, an adult who had a childhood history of reactive attachment disorder is going to either have an antisocial personality disorder, or they're going to have a borderline personality disorder. On the other side, we have the potential for them to develop depression and anxiety, even to the extent of being suicidal or unable to function in a daily living situation. So both can be very debilitating and devastating in their personal functioning. With proper treatment, we're definitely going to improve the odds that they'll function better. So we'll have fewer characteristics of the personality disorder. Hopefully, if there's a mental illness with a tendency to depression or anxiety, we're going to find that the young adult will be able to self-regulate and monitor their own emotional conditions, seeking help and intervention when it's warranted. So that will definitely upgrade their opportunity for personal adjustment and growth.
Is there hope for healing?
I think unquestionably there is. From my perspective as a clinician, the hope lies particularly in 2 or 3 discoveries of the last few years. One of them is our finally coming to grips with the fact that babies remember. That young children know about their experiences and can and do tell us about them and their behavior. And what that makes possible is more knowledge about the child's early experience, but it also means that we're not just stuck with fretting about the behavior itself. We decide that the behavior of a young child is always meaningful, and hope lies in paying attention to that behavior as if it's meaningful and following it to its original source. Huge hope for clinicians and parents in that.
You believe that? You don't believe it?
I would be willing to say all children have the potential to
That's what I
heal.
said.
Yes,
Potential.
yeah, you did
Not
say
that they
that.
will.
Right.
So maybe with the proper therapy, all children have the potential to heal.
Therapy in the family
With
or
the-
community.
With proper therapy, parenting.
I think maybe a more helpful comment to make would be that we're fast approaching a time when we have the tools to help all children heal. Whether all children will respond or whether we'll know what we're doing with those tools, that remains to be seen. But I think we're approaching a time when we have what it takes. We know how to interview, we know how to watch, we know what questions to ask. Would that be helpful? Okay. Oh, you were recording that?
Yes, it was.
Sorry, I was
We're
just.
going to say it again. Go ahead, say it again.
Yeah. There's so many variabilities in whether or not children heal. But I think we are fast approaching a time when we have at our disposal most of the tools we need to help children and families heal. We know what to look for. We know how to observe once we didn't. We know that since behavior is always meaningful, always stands for something, we know how to look for that. We know how to follow it up with questions, and we know how to support families. We don't always do that, but we certainly have the tools, and therefore I would say all children soon will have the potential to heal.